There are moments in life when we look back and feel the sting of regret. We wonder about the years lost to mistakes, pain, wrong choices, or even seasons where life simply didn't turn out the way we hoped. But let me tell you something today. God is not bound by your past. He is the Redeemer of time itself. And when He restores, He doesn't just bring back what was lost, He multiplies it in ways you could never have imagined. When we talk about God as the restorer and not just the healer, we step into a truth that changes how we see every season of loss and pain. Healing is powerful, and it is a gift. Healing takes what has been broken and makes it whole again. Healing dries the tears, closes the wound, and helps you move forward without the pain that once held you back. But restoration goes even deeper. Restoration is when God looks at the place of your greatest loss, the place where the enemy thought he had the final word, and He writes a new ending. He doesn't simply return you to what you had before. He brings you into something greater than you ever experienced, something that reveals His heart of abundance. Restoration is always an upgrade. When God restores, He doesn't return things in their old condition. He renews them, multiplies them, and enhances them. This is why the story of Job is so powerful. Job lost everything: his family, his possessions, his health. For a time, his world was completely shattered. Yet when God stepped in to restore, He didn't just give Job back the same number of livestock or the same level of wealth. Job received double what he had before. He ended with greater honor, greater abundance, and a testimony that continues to echo through generations. That is the difference between healing and restoration. Healing gets you back to standing on your feet, but restoration sets you running into a future far brighter than your past. Think about it this way. If a house is damaged in a storm, healing is like repairing the walls and roof so the house is livable again. Restoration is like tearing down the broken parts and rebuilding it into a mansion with more rooms, stronger foundations, and better beauty than before the storm. Healing is wonderful, but restoration is transformative. It changes the very quality of your life, because God is not just interested in fixing the surface. He is after revealing His extravagant goodness through you. This means that in your own life, no loss is ever final when God is involved. What looks like an ending can actually be the setup for a new chapter filled with greater blessings. God uses the very areas of our lives that seemed ruined to showcase His power to restore. If you lost time, He can accelerate your progress. If you lost relationships, He can bring people into your life who love you deeper and truer. If you lost opportunities, He can open doors that you never imagined possible. And when He does, you realize that you didn't just recover, you were promoted. That's the heart of restoration. I remember a young man who spent years in addiction. By the time he came out of it, he felt as though half his life had been wasted. He was ashamed, convinced that his chance at purpose had slipped away. But as he surrendered his story to God, something remarkable happened. Not only was he set free, but doors began to open for him to counsel and mentor others who were struggling with the same chains he once carried. Within a few years, he was married, thriving in his career, and leading a recovery program that helped hundreds find hope. If you asked him today, he would tell you that what the enemy meant for destruction, God used as the very platform for his destiny. He didn't just get healed of addiction. His whole life was restored into something greater than he could have imagined. That's the nature of God. He doesn't merely patch up broken pieces. He takes those pieces, reshapes them, and crafts something stronger, more beautiful, and more fruitful. He is the restorer, not just the healer. And when He restores, the testimony is always this: I didn't just get back what I lost, I stepped into something far greater. When we think about wasted years, our hearts often carry the heavy weight of regret. We replay decisions we wish we had made differently, opportunities we let slip away, or seasons of pain that seem to stall our progress. In our human perspective, wasted years feel like lost ground, time we will never get back. But here is the hope that changes everything. In God's hands, no year is ever truly wasted. What feels wasted to us becomes the very raw material that He uses to create something beautiful, something purposeful, something that could not have existed without that season. Every tear shed in loneliness, every prayer whispered in silence, every stretch of waiting that felt fruitless is not forgotten. God is not careless with your life. He is the kind of father who collects every tear in a bottle, who hears every word you've spoken in desperation, and who takes the very moments you thought were empty and turns them into seeds of destiny. Those wasted years are not thrown away. They are being cultivated in secret. And when the time comes, he knows how to make 1 year of his favor outweigh a decade of struggle. Think about how a farmer plants seeds in the ground. For a long time, there is no visible growth. The soil looks barren and the process seems unproductive. But beneath the surface, life is being formed. Roots are spreading, strength is building, and at just the right moment, the seed breaks through into harvest. That is how God works with our wasted years. They may look barren to us, but underneath, he is preparing something that will one day burst forth with fruit far greater than the pain of the waiting. The truth is, God knows how to redeem time. We measure our lives in years, months, and days, but he is the creator of time, and he can accelerate what would normally take decades into a single season. Where you think you've lost too much ground, he knows how to move you forward in supernatural speed. Where you feel behind, he knows how to position you right on schedule. Those years you thought were wasted become the very foundation for what he's building now. I once heard the story of a woman who spent years in a destructive relationship. She gave away her time, her energy, and her dreams, believing that things would eventually change. When it all fell apart, she felt broken, convinced she had lost the prime of her life. But as she began to lean on God, something shifted. Over time, he brought healing, opened new opportunities, and surrounded her with a community that spoke life into her. Within a few years, she discovered passions she had buried long ago, stepped into a career that fulfilled her, and eventually found herself in a marriage marked by love and respect. She often said that though she grieved those years of pain, God used them as the very soil where her resilience and faith were planted. Today, she helps others who feel trapped in broken relationships, using her story as a beacon of hope. What she once called wasted has become the very thing God uses to impact others. This is how God works. He wastes nothing. The years of wandering become testimonies of his guidance. The years of sorrow become rivers of compassion for others. The years of delay become platforms for accelerated favor. You may look back and see nothing but broken pieces, but God looks forward and sees the masterpiece he is forming with them. And when his restoration comes, you realize that no time was ever truly wasted. It was all part of the journey that led you into his perfect plan. Restoration always begins with a change in the way we see our lives. The battle is not first in our circumstances. It is in our perspective. Many people live under the weight of the words, "It's too late for me." They rehearse regrets, replay missed opportunities, and convince themselves that nothing good can come from where they are. But heaven never speaks in terms of too late. God doesn't measure your potential by your past or by the years you think you've wasted. He looks at you through the lens of eternity, and in his hands, time is not a limitation. What feels final to us is simply unfinished to him. When you surrender your past to God, it no longer functions as a prison. Instead, it becomes a testimony. The mistakes, the wrong turns, the failures, once they are placed in his hands, they are rewritten into a story of redemption. That is why perspective matters so much. If you continue to see your past as wasted, you will stay locked in regret. But if you see it through God's eyes, you will begin to realize that even your darkest chapters can become the very pages that inspire someone else's freedom. The shift in perspective is not denial of what happened. It is recognition that God is able to redeem it and use it in ways you cannot yet imagine. When you see life through God's lens, regret is replaced with expectation. Instead of waking up thinking about what could have been, you start to believe that something greater is still coming. This expectation creates faith, and faith positions you to receive what God is ready to pour out. The enemy wants you stuck in the thought that you've missed your chance. God wants you awakened to the truth that your future is wide open because he is the one writing it. A powerful example of this is found in the life of a man who spent decades in prison for a crime he did not commit. When he was finally released, he was already in his 50s. To most people, his best years were gone. He had no career, no family of his own, and very little resources. He could have easily given in to the thought, it's too late for me, but he chose a different perspective. He began to see his past not as wasted, but as preparation. He started sharing his story of endurance, of holding on to hope in the darkest nights, and of how faith sustained him behind bars. That perspective shift opened doors for him to travel, to speak to young people, and to inspire others facing hopelessness. Within a few short years, the years he thought were stolen became the very platform for his greatest influence. Today, countless lives have been touched because he refused to let regret define his future. That's the heart of restoration. It begins inside you with the way you see. If you keep saying, it's too late, you shut the door on what God wants to do. But when you align your perspective with his truth, you step into a posture of expectation. Suddenly, your past no longer chains you. It propels you. You begin to walk with hope, not because your history is flawless, but because your God is faithful. And once you shift your perspective, you are ready to see restoration unfold in ways you never imagined. When God restores, he does not simply give you back what you lost in the same measure or form. His restoration always surpasses expectation. Often when people face disappointment or loss, they adjust their hopes downward. They stop dreaming big and instead just wish for the bare minimum to survive. It is almost like the heart says, if I can just get by, I'll be okay. But that is not how God operates. He is not in the business of scraping together leftovers to hand back to you. His very nature is abundance. And when he restores, he takes what was broken and multiplies it into something far better than you could have ever asked for. The story of the prodigal son is a clear picture of this truth. After wasting his inheritance and losing everything, the son rehearsed a speech in his mind. He thought to himself, I will go back to my father and say, make me like one of your hired servants. That was his expectation. He believed the best he could hope for was a place in the servant's quarters, working for the father he had dishonored. But the father's response shattered his expectations. He ran to him, embraced him, clothed him with a robe, placed a ring on his finger, and threw a feast in his honor. The son expected servanthood. The father restored sonship. That is the nature of God's restoration. It goes beyond what we think we deserve and delivers what only his love can provide. This truth matters because many of us approach God with low expectations. We ask for just enough peace to get through the day, just enough provision to pay the bills, just enough hope to keep going. Yet God promises to do exceedingly abundantly above all we could ask or think. When he restores, he doesn't erase the memory of pain by simply making things normal again. He pours out blessings that so outweigh the loss that the pain begins to lose its power. It's like someone who loses a job they thought was secure. At first, the loss feels devastating. They might pray, just give me another job to pay the bills. But then God opens a door to an opportunity that not only provides financial stability, but also aligns perfectly with their gifts and passions. Suddenly, they're thriving in ways they never imagined. They realize that if they had only gotten back what they lost, they would have missed the greater gift waiting for them. That is how God works. He doesn't just replace, he elevates. I once knew of a man who went through a painful divorce. For years, he felt like his life was over. He prayed just to have a second chance at companionship, nothing more. His expectation was modest because his heart had been bruised by loss. But God's restoration went beyond what he asked. In time, he not only found love again, but also stepped into a marriage that was richer, healthier, and more life-giving than anything he had known before. Together, they built a blended family full of joy and laughter. Today, he says the pain of the past no longer holds him because the goodness of the present has far surpassed it. His story is proof that God restores in ways that make yesterday's wounds pale in comparison to today's blessings. That is the essence of God's promise. When he restores beyond what you thought possible, beyond what you dared to ask, beyond the small measure of hope you carried. So don't limit your prayers to survival-level expectations. Don't assume the best you can hope for is scraps of what was lost. Lift your faith higher. Expect his restoration to surprise you, to overwhelm you, to make you look back and say, I never imagined it could be this good, because that's what God delights in doing, restoring in ways that surpass every expectation. When God restores your wasted years, it is never only about you. His work in your life is always bigger than your own story. The restoration you experience becomes a signpost pointing others toward His goodness and faithfulness. Too often, we think of restoration in personal terms, what we gain back, what we recover, how our lives improve. And while God deeply cares about those things, He also has a larger purpose in mind. Every restoration is designed to put His glory on display so that others who are watching can be drawn into hope. Your story becomes living proof that God is still at work in the world. When people see you healed, restored, and flourishing after a season of brokenness, they begin to believe that restoration is possible for them too. This is why your restoration is not just your reward, it is your assignment. It becomes a testimony that carries weight far beyond your personal life. Someone else, sitting in their darkest moment, might hear what God has done for you and whisper, He did it for them, maybe He can do it for me. That spark of hope is the beginning of their breakthrough. We often underestimate the power of our testimony. We think it's just our story, but in reality, it is a declaration of God's character. It says, here is who He is, here is what He has done, and here is why you can trust Him too. That is why God delights in restoring the most broken areas of our lives. Those are the places that, once renewed, shine the brightest light. The very wounds we thought disqualified us become the scars that speak the loudest about His ability to redeem. Restoration is contagious. It spreads hope like wildfire. Revival doesn't always start with a preacher on a stage. It often begins with ordinary people whose lives have been touched and transformed by God's hand. When neighbors, friends, or family members see the change in you, they cannot deny that something greater is at work. That curiosity draws them closer, and soon your restoration becomes the seed of theirs. Consider the story of a man who spent years trapped in homelessness and addiction. His family gave up on him, and society wrote him off as a lost cause. After encountering God, he was completely transformed, sober, stable, and full of life. At first, the restoration looked like a personal miracle. He had a roof over his head, steady work, and peace of mind. But it didn't stop there. His testimony began to ripple outward. Other men on the street who knew him in his brokenness saw the change and started asking questions. Slowly, they began to believe that if God could lift him out of the pit, maybe He could lift them too. Today, that man runs a shelter and recovery program, helping countless others find freedom. His restoration was never meant to end with him. It became a platform for God's glory and a lifeline for others. This is how God writes His story through our lives. He restores not just so you can enjoy a second chance, but so others can encounter His nature through you. Every time you share your testimony, you are spreading seeds of faith. Every time someone sees the difference in you, they catch a glimpse of God's glory. And in that way, your restoration becomes part of something far greater, a move of God that goes beyond your personal life and begins to shape families, communities, and even generations. So when God restores you, remember this, it's not just your story, it's His glory. And His glory revealed in your life is what will awaken hope in others and spark restoration all around you. So hear me today, the wasted years, the lost opportunities, the broken seasons, they are not the end of your story. They are simply the backdrop for God's glory. You serve the God who takes the ashes of yesterday and forms crowns of beauty, the God who turns mourning into dancing, the God who restores wasted years in ways you never imagined. Step forward with expectation. Lift your head with faith, because your best days are not behind you. They are being written right now by the hand of a God who restores. And when He restores, He doesn't just give back time, He gives back destiny.